travelers, and welcome to Go See, Do Explore.
Here, we dive deep into the heart of travel, sharing hidden gems, unforgettable experiences, and the stories that make each destination unique.
Whether you're a seasoned traveler or dreaming of your next getaway, you're in the right place to get inspired.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashley.
And together, we'll set the course for your next great adventure and discover the stories that make each place unforgettable.
It's time to go, see, and do more. Let's explore. Hello, everybody. We are back for another episode of Go See, Do Explore. And this time we are digging into our travel memory banks. And we're going to talk about some of our favorite travel memories.
Yeah, I got thinking about this in part because I didn't want to just have an episode where we live in our own nostalgia, because that probably wouldn't be fun for you, but thinking about how transformative travel can be. And so we each made our own lists, I think, kind of with our own criteria, but in general, just thinking about those transformative experiences that maybe changed your perspective or clarified a thing or helped you make a decision. And hopefully what we talk about today can provide some inspiration for you for the next time you travel. So we're doing this in classic top 10 format, right?
Yes. So we both have 5 items, plus probably some backups just in case. And we have not shown the other person our list, so it will be a surprise.
Okay. I think I'm going to run through mine probably chronologically. You don't have to do that, but I think that's how I'm going to do it. And my first memory is when I went to the Smoky Mountains with my family when I was probably, I don't know, in kindergarten or something. I was very young. And what I remember about that trip in particular was, I believe, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was my dad's first ever paid vacation. And so I remember that being kind of the big deal of the trip. And it was a good trip, and we went to all the places that you would think with the Smokies, you know, to Gatlinburg and to Cades Cove and to Clingman's Dome, as it was known, and all, you know, Cherokee and all those places. But I remember my mom saying to me, I don't remember exactly how she said it, but I remember she basically told me, like, how special it was that we got to go on a vacation, like that this was a big deal. And I think about that memory a lot, not so much the memory even of the actual trip itself, although I have a lot of memories from that trip, like staying at the Comfort Inn and getting the weird, like, suitcaseosaurus thing that Comfort Inn was giving out in those days. It was like a weird figurine thing. I don't know. But no, just remembering, like, the way I had been kind of set up to understand that this was a big deal, that we were traveling somewhere together as a family. And maybe that was what opened up the love of travel for me, is realizing how special it is. I don't know. But I think about that a lot and that trip. And I also think about how much my mom made me practice walking for that trip, because we were going to be doing a lot of hiking, and I still have a love of walking. And I don't know if that goes back all that way, but yeah, so that's my first one.
Now you're making me rethink my list, because I did not go back that far.
Okay, that's fine.
All the ones on my list are I think they're like all like the last 10, 15 years.
It's because you travel much better now. Well, like, since we've been married and traveling, you take better trips.
I will instead go a little farther back. So I feel like the first time I ever did any real traveling was when I was in high school. I went on a summer exchange program where I went to 4 different countries, I think, 6 different cities, and we went from place to place. We stayed like 3 to 5 days in each place, which I think is why I have my need to move.
That makes sense.
When we travel, why I can't just be like, go to some beach resort and sit on the beach for a week. That sounds really boring to me. That was actually most of my trips when I was a kid.
Yeah.
If any of my family is listening, I'm sorry.
To be clear, I don't propose that we stay a long time at a beach resort. I propose we stay a long time in, like, a city, but that's also boring.
I mean, there are things to do, but you kind of run out of things to do. And so therefore I like a few days at each place. But when I think back on that trip, one of my host families asked me, so do you think, do you want to come back to Europe? Do you think you're going to come back to Europe anytime soon? And I told him, yes, I'd like to come back to Europe, but I feel like first I need to see more of the US. At that point, I had been, in our home state of Michigan. I had been to Florida, and then we had driven to Florida. I really think the only places in the U.S. I had been were on the I-75 corridor. Oh, and we had gone to Louisiana, and we had driven there to visit family. So that was it. Like, I hadn't seen the East Coast. I hadn't seen the West Coast. I specifically remember telling my host father that I wanted to see the Grand Canyon. And honestly, the funny thing is, by the time we finally did go back to Europe, I had seen the Grand Canyon. I had seen Yellowstone. I had seen California. I had been to Maine. I had been to California. I had been to Alaska. And so I think back on that kind of a lot and how I really lived up to my high school word. We made it, I did make it back to Europe, but I kind of put some parameters there first.
Yeah, that's funny because I don't think that was really on purpose, but that's how it worked out.
No, that's how it worked out. What's next on your list?
Oh boy, I have some decisions to make. Okay. The next one I'm going to talk about is sort of a selection that I'm making to represent something broader, which is I think a lot about when I went hiking for a week in the Porcupine Mountains in 2002. And the reason why I choose that trip is because that was the first time I ever did like a week long in the woods, going from place to place, in this case, hiking. Taken a fair number of trips like that since then, whether it be hiking or kayaking, or I even did a cycling trip one time. I don't do nearly as much of that these days as I used to, but that became a defining method of travel for me in, I would say, my late teens and up until probably my mid-20s or so. That was sort of the primary way that I traveled, and even we traveled to some degree. We didn't necessarily do a bunch of backcountry, but we were camping a lot as our primary means of travel. And it still, I think, is a great thing to do, a great way to see places. And I mean, I want to do more of it. It's just always so time consuming to do something like that. But that Porcupine Mountains trip was really special because it was so remote, so rugged, and it's just a completely different way of operating, right? Like you're in this park and you have to carry your stuff and you have to cook all your food and carry it around with you, carry your trash. But it's an incredible place. That park is really, really nice. And you can see all sorts of beautiful Michigan scenery there. And it led me to be able to take later trips like to Algonquin Park in Canada and to Isle Royale in Michigan and other places like that. But it all started for me at Porcupine Mountains. We got to go back there just a couple of years ago, and it was really fun to kind of go back and see it again, even though we were only front country that time. But that's my number 2.
All right, my next memory. I'm going to jump forward quite a bit, and I'm going to talk about when we went to the Grand Canyon in 2019. Was this on your list? You're nodding.
No, it's good.
So the reason that this moment stands out to me is 2019 is kind of when we saw a change in the way we travel. We had taken some trips between when we got married and then, but we had done, after our honeymoon, we were pretty much only doing road trips. So we took a flight to go to a conference in Phoenix, and it was my first flight, and I guess your first flight too, in like 6 years?
Yeah. 5-6 years.
Yeah. So it was that trip, and I mean, going to the Grand Canyon in the winter after a big snowfall and having the Grand Canyon to ourselves, that in and of itself was amazing. But that trip, I feel like, was a turning point in the way we travel.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, we didn't have it totally to ourselves. There was that one couple that was like going off down the canyon that looked absolutely terrified.
Yeah, I don't know what you're thinking when, there was just record snowfall in Flagstaff and you're like, I'm going to go down the Bright Angel Trail. I don't know what they were thinking. But.
I mean, they didn't look totally unprepared, but it didn't seem like a good idea.
It's funny that I think back on that trip a lot, especially because I see the Grand Canyon frequently come up on like most overrated destination lists, and people are just going at the wrong time.
Yeah. Well, like, are they blind?
Well, I think what it is we haven't experienced the Grand Canyon in the summer. But when you go to the Grand Canyon in the summer, it's very hot and there's just mobs and mobs of people.
No doubt. It's still the Grand Canyon, though. Like, it's not like you can't see it, right? Yeah, overrated is the wrong word. Maybe there are other options that are less crowded, but like, it's still the Grand Canyon.
I mean, people refer to things as the Grand Canyon of. So,
Right.
I mean, it's pretty important.
Yeah, but they don't refer to the Grand Canyon as the Grand Canyon of anything. It's just the Grand Canyon.
And everyone around the world knows what that is. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, yep.
All right, what's next on your list?
Okay, I'm also skipping. I had a couple on my list that, like, I didn't mention the first time I went to Europe, and I was thinking about mentioning our honeymoon, but ultimately with only 5 slots, I have to skip ahead also to 2019. And especially as we're talking about, like, significant memories or moments in a trip. We took a trip to Maine in 2019. It was not our first time going to Maine. We went to Maine somewhat briefly in 2018 to Mount Desert Island, and we went back in 19. But that was a really fun trip for a lot of reasons. For one, I got to hike pretty much every morning that the weather was good, which was awesome. Like, got to do all kinds of little hikes. It was, the previous year we had camped, and camping is really fun, but for whatever reason, I don't know why, I just have a harder time like getting up early and getting out and hiking. And when you're in Maine in the summer, if you want good light, you have to go really early because the sun rises really early, like 5:30 or something like that, something absurd. So if you want that early morning light, you have to get out like before 5. You have to be on the road. So anyway, being in an Airbnb, it was easier or some sort of a short-term rental.
I think it was important. A VRBO.
Yeah, it was easier. I was able to everyone was still sleeping, but I was able to go by myself. You went with me one time. And so that was really fun. But there was one moment in particular on that trip that is something I still think about all the time. And that was like maybe 4 or 5 days we had been there, and the weather had been kind of rainy. And I decided I wanted to go for a hike in the afternoon. And because all of the rocks were really wet, I didn't do any of I was really wanting to do like a ladder trail, but I didn't want to slip and die. So I did these 2 easy trails in the very southwest corner of the park. There's the Ship Harbor Trail and the Wonderland Trail, and they both go from the road just to the water. But they're not that far from each other. And what you can actually do, if you really want to, is you can walk the one to the water, and then you can walk the coastline from the one to the other, and then walk back on the other. So that was what I did. I think I walked Wonderland out to the coast. I walked along the coast, and then I walked back on the Ship Harbor Trail. And that's probably the first time I can think of that I used travel as a decision-making tool. Something that we've heard about from Samantha Brown, and we were just talking about this earlier, actually. But
yeah, I think it would be a good topic for a whole other podcast.
Yeah. But I decided on that walk that there were some things about my career path that I wasn't happy with. And not only that I wasn't happy with them, but I even started to decide it was more of a positive thing. It was like I want to have the kind of career that allows me to come to places like this more and to have the freedom to even work from places like this. And it sort of just hit me like a bolt of lightning in 2019. And I set about doing that with like fast and slow, but it was only 2021. It was only really 2 years later that I had accomplished that. And one of the reasons why I want to go back to Maine, I want to go back to Maine for so many reasons. It's so beautiful and fun, but I also I feel like I need to do the full circle thing of being like, and I did it and I'm back here, but yeah, that's probably my most significant one. The main one.
It's the main one.
The main one. Yeah. And then I came back and I think made some skirt steak or something, fajitas. I want to say it was just like everything was normal, but I'd had this like transformative experience. I should mention that it was dumping rain, so I was like walking along the angry Maine coast with like the rocks and the slipperiness and like pouring rain all by myself, no one around. Like, yeah, it was pretty epic.
So the next one on my list is also in 2019. Did I mention that 2019 was like a really important year in travel for us?
It was.
So
probably in part because we remember it so fondly given 2020, right? Like,
yeah, that's like, probably part of it.
We had just gotten started.
And we had, oh my gosh, we had some big dreams for 2020 that were like, wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, a lot of people did. We weren't alone in that.
It's funny because we didn't talk about these lists in advance, and I didn't know that we were going to go in chronological order in advance, but right now they're lining up perfectly, so we'll see if it continues. But at the very end of 2019, we took a road trip back to the Finger Lakes of New York, which is kind of funny that in 2018 we took a road trip that went to Boston, Maine, and the Finger Lakes, and in 2019 we went back to Maine and we went back to the Finger Lakes.
Yep.
You could tell that trip, we discovered a lot of places that we like. And we currently have plans to go back to the Finger Lakes again.
Yep.
I'm going to cross my fingers it's going to happen this time. So we took a trip back to the Finger Lakes. We visited a lot of wineries and we bought a lot of wine.
I think my mom bought most of the wine for us.
Yes.
Thanks, Mom, if you're listening.
But honestly, after the fact, I have said that in some ways that trip really did change our lives because we were interested in wine before, but we got like hyper into wine and wine travel and also like boutique wine, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that...
Small production.
But then obviously not long after December 2019, COVID hit, everyone shut down. And these wineries that we started following after we visited them just a few months before, they were posting all kinds of deals, like buy a case and it's free shipping. And so as a family, we were sharing this. Just to be clear, we weren't those people drinking super heavily during the pandemic. But it's just a trip that like wine kind of became a priority.
A part of our lives.
Wine became a part of our lives and definitely a part of the way we travel.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, what I was going to say that would have been wrong was, we were drinking Burlwood Cellars from Aldi, but that's not quite true. That was a few years prior that we had been buying this Burlwood Cellars Pinot Noir from Aldi, and we're like, this is pretty good, yeah. And then we went to northern Michigan and brought back some wine, and then had the Burlwood, and we're like, oh, not so good.
No, we realized that cheap wine is...
Yeah.
Not as good as more expensive wine?
I will stand by the fact that if you go to Aldi and buy the Winking Owl Cabernet Sauvignon, it is completely inoffensive. Like, there is absolutely... You cannot find fault with that wine. It is also, like, the most boring wine that exists.
You also won't find any, like, ooh, that was interesting.
Right. But, like, compared to other wines, even more expensive wines, where, like, there are faults, and you're like, that's disgusting. That tastes like something it's not supposed to. The Winking Owl Cabernet is, like, made in a lab or something to be, perfect. But anyway, yeah. Yeah. That was an important one, too. Yeah, I agree with that one, certainly. It wasn't on my list, but it's, definitely.
When I think about, travel moments that changed our lives, that trip 100% changed our lives.
Yeah, definitely. And don't worry, we don't have a wine drinking problem. If anything, we have a wine purchasing problem. Yeah. If you want some of it, just let us know. We'll make it happen. Okay, let's go to a wine break. We're here for the wine break. And we have something pretty special today. I'm looking at a bottle of Vera de Sousa white port. And if you haven't heard of white port, it's a thing. It's just port made with white grapes. This we brought back from Portugal. We had it in Portugal. And I remember it was, I think, the first thing we had at this particular winery. And I remember it being so floral, so like unbelievably floral. And I was so excited about it. And I just had to buy a bottle and bring it home. And we did. And we just got to open it a couple weekends ago. Finally, it's been, over a year. But yeah, this is just like the last little bit of it and see what we think.
Yeah, it's just so good. It's unlike anything else, really. Like, it's not like an ice wine. It's not that, like, super, super sweet like an ice wine.
No, this was a common theme with, like, quality sweet wines, quality dessert wines, quality fortified wines that we've had in places that are known for those. Is they're sweet, but they're always balanced. It doesn't taste like someone's punching you with sugar, right? Like, it's a balanced flavor. I have to say, much as I do love this, I think this has oxidized a bit since we brought it home. That or my memory is just terrible because it has almost a little bit of a sherry flavor to it to me. It's in wine that's, well, not in wine, in chemistry, it's referred to as acetaldehyde, is that particular compound that has that kind of sherry aroma. Yeah, I don't really know how else to describe that aroma other than it smells like sherry. It's not bad here, but it's definitely, to me, a little out of place. But that's not the fault of the winemaker or anything like that. That's just the fact that we brought it home from Europe and then held on to it. I feel like it should have kept okay, but anyway. I'm complaining, but it's good. It's really good still.
Well, I want to mention, too, Vieira de Souza was the first winery that we visited in the Douro on our Douro Valley wine tour of Portugal. And it was very interesting because the winemaker is a woman and all of the staff are women. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't think literally all of the staff, but I think like the owners are women.
Yeah, and it's kind of a big deal in the wine industry, but in Portugal specifically.
Well, and one of the things we liked about this place too was that it was Portuguese owned. I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, the big port houses are British companies, and that's fine. I mean, we don't have like a beef with that, but we were really looking to find those very small Portuguese owned port houses, and this was one of them.
Yeah, if you're going to be in the area, we recommend Vieira de Souza.
Yes. Okay. Good wine break. Okay, so since we're back from the wine break, I think it is my turn.
Are you still somehow in 2019?
No. The next trip I want to mention is just the very next year. This is going to be kind of a theme for my more recent memories, as this is what travel has in a sense become for me. But in 2020, in July, end of July, we went to the Upper Peninsula, and we went also to Door Peninsula in Wisconsin. And it was a good trip. We had a lot of fun. We did camping. We went to Porcupine Mountains. That was what I was mentioning earlier, that we went back on that trip. It was that trip. In particular, towards the end of the trip, when we were in Wisconsin and the trip was winding down and it was time to sort of think about returning to work, I realized that I didn't want to do that. And not because I don't like work, and not because my situation was really, really bad or anything like that, to be clear. Like, I don't want to make this sound dramatic. But it was another one of those moments where I was somewhere scenic by the water and just sort of realized what I'm doing right now is not giving me what I want, and I don't want to continue doing that. Right? And so I said to Ashley, I think that I can't go back to work.
I think your exact words were, I think I'm going to quit my job.
Yeah. And, I don't know if you thought I was serious or...
I thought you were crazy.
Yeah, I know that. And so I went back, and I didn't just quit the next day, but very, very quickly I changed my career in a matter of basically a month after that trip. And it was just another one of those moments that was really clarity producing, which has been a theme for me in travel basically since 2019. And so that was a really good trip overall. Had a lot of fun. Think a lot about Door Peninsula. It was I'd like to go back there, definitely. A couple places in particular there that I really enjoyed.
And one of them was Al Johnson's.
Al Johnson's was definitely one of them.
I don't know. I remember maybe we mentioned it when we did our top 10 meals. But Al Johnson's is a Swedish restaurant in Outdoor Peninsula, I think in Sister Bay.
Sister Bay, yeah.
And what makes Al Johnson's unique is that they have goats that eat their roof. They've got a live roof, a sod roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, and instead of, having a normal roof, they have a sod roof and they have goats.
Yep. And in the summer, so someone like picks these goats up from the barn every day and drives them down to the restaurant and then puts them on the roof and then like drives them back to their barn home every night. Mm-hmm. So they don't stay up there and they don't live like on the restaurant property, but there's a camera. You can watch them online. Mm-hmm. You know what I think about whenever I think about that restaurant though, honestly, is I think about you and I were in the parking lot, I think walking in, and we were talking about when on earth are we going to get this runaway camper? We were like, because we were supposed to have it for that trip, mm-hmm. but obviously 2020, it just didn't happen.
No, it was months later before we got it.
Yeah, I think September. Yeah, but that would be my next important one.
Yeah, I remember you walking. We did a hike. Was it a hike to a lighthouse in Peninsula State Park? Mm-hmm. And that's when you told me that you're going to quit your job?
Yeah, is that what it was? I remember it was that day. But I had been thinking it all day. I just hadn't, articulated it. Yeah.
That was terrifying.
Yeah. it was fine, though, right? It ended up being pretty good.
The funny thing is, I feel like as you're talking about this, I feel like you need to write, a self-help book, how travel will help you realize your full potential or something like that.
Yeah. Right. I feel like that. Anyway, I don't need to dunk on self-help authors. Just feel like, it would work for me. Like I'd write that book and then
then you make all the money,
successful, and then be like, see, just be like me. Uh-huh. Write a dumb book that doesn't help anyone, and then.
Do I edit this out?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely have been cultivating a story for a few years now, and this sort of decisions made while traveling is definitely a big part of it, more than I'm saying here, because it's, I'm not going to overshare on a podcast, but yeah.
So the next one on my list continues in chronological order. So it's funny how that happened.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go 2021. And that was the first trip that we ever took that you were able to work while traveling.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
But the moment, since this is we're not talking whole trips here, right? We're kind of trying to come up with a moment. The moment that I was thinking of momentary, when we were at Yellowstone and we were staying at the Old Faithful Inn, and how we somehow managed to get a room at the Old Faithful Inn, which is notoriously books up a year in advance. Mm-hmm. But we managed to get a room 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, we were on a wait list, right? And then there was it was just a cancellation.
It was because 2021, they were still figuring out the capacities and all of that for the lodging because of COVID. And they realized that what the state of the pandemic was at that point, that they could open up more rooms. Mm. And so because I wasn't able to find a room, I joined their mailing list, and I got an email that said, we're opening up more rooms for this season, and clicked on the link and booked a room.
Yeah.
A week, 2 weeks before we were going to arrive. And that is just unheard of with the Old Faithful Inn.
Yep. I remember that because we were at the food truck rally.
Yeah. But I feel like the best moment of that part of the trip was when we were staying at the Old Faithful Inn, and they have this mezzanine, and I don't know if it's still like this, but in 2021 it was only open to guests at the inn. So we were able to go out, sit on this mezzanine balcony overlooking Old Faithful, watch the sun go down, watch the sunset, watch Old Faithful erupt, and then walk 10 feet to our room or whatever, 100 feet to our room, where everyone else had to, get in their car and get out of the park. That was amazing.
Yes, it was really great. And the wine break that evening was Two Lads Pinot Noir. I remember it quite well. Yeah. I also, the related memory for that, I was working on a degree at that moment, and I was doing some homework on that trip too. In addition to working, I was also doing homework. And I remember in that hotel room, alternating in the early morning as I was working on this between this wicker chair that was like from Teddy Roosevelt or whatever and the wood floor that had like a nail sticking up that would grab my shorts or whatever periodically if I moved. And I just like, they were both so uncomfortable. I just had to alternate between them as I did my homework. Yeah, that was a great trip.
Yeah.
Our first two, at least for me, I think the first time since I've been a working person that I was ever out for more than like a week, right? Like I never left home since I started working. Even as a kid, like being gone more than a week was rare, but I did it at least one time. But yeah, I mean, that was like, to be gone for 3 weeks was pretty awesome.
I think that was the same for me, except for obviously when I was in Europe, and then I was gone in Europe for 3 weeks and a week at camp before. But.
Right. Yeah, it's a nice luxury to be able to work from the road because you can really extend trips in pretty awesome ways.
I think we've talked about that a lot.
We have.
All right. Is this your last one?
It's my last one. I think this is a moment or a memory. See, now I'm doing it. Momentary. This is a memory that I think is still becoming a thing as I continue this theme now of decisions, choices made while traveling. And this is not so much a decision as it is like just another moment of clarity. I remember this past summer, the trip that we took that we've recapped on this podcast, our trip to Italy. Lots of amazing memories from that trip. But probably the one I think about most frequently is when we were in Naples and we went up that thing. There's like a funicular and you go up this hill and there's a fort. And there was, the TikToker doing some dance to, was it September? Was it Earth, Wind, and Fire September or something like that?
It was, that's a weird choice.
It was something like that. It was like a song of that era, definitely. But anyway, yeah, the TikTokers making their weird dance videos and all that.
And having to do it like 6 times to get it right.
Yeah. But I remember being up there around sunset, seeing all of Naples kind of laid out in front of us, which is a big city. It was the biggest city we went to on that trip in Italy anyway. And seeing Vesuvius there, like this big mountain on the right. And I had been kind of stressing out about some stuff that we don't need to get into on this podcast leading up to that week and the time we had been in Sicily. And not only was this just on its own an amazing thing to see, but I just remember thinking, like, look at all this. My problems are so small. And that's been kind of my theme even this year, which has been actually a really challenging year in a lot of ways. Not in ways that anyone needs to be concerned about here if you're listening. Not like that kind of challenging, but just been like I've been faced with obstacle after obstacle kind of this year. And that, like, since that trip and since that moment in Naples, I think that my mindset has been, I would say a Neapolitan mindset now, which is just like, not who cares. It's not who cares, but it's kind of like, we are Neapolitans, we'll do what we want.
Our espresso is the best.
They just call it coffee.
It's just
like, we don't use those words. We just call it coffee. That's what... Anyway, I'm not saying I've become Neapolitan. I don't think that's true by any means.
You do make good pizza.
But Naples, yeah. I mean, like, Naples, it wasn't really even so much Naples. It's just that moment that really affected me. And it's another one of those in this series of moments I've had in 2019 and in 2020 and, yeah, in 2024. And on some hill in Naples looking at Mount Vesuvius. That's my last one.
So for my last one, I'm going to back up a hair.
Okay.
And I'm going to go to our transatlantic cruise in 2023.
That was a good one.
So this moment kind of goes back to the first moment, my first travel memory that I talked about. And that was just returning to Europe, but also returning to Europe in an unusual way.
By boat.
We're not normal travelers. I'm not going to return to Europe the first time by a plane, and definitely not a plane direct from our nearest airport to the nearest airport to where we're staying. That's not going to happen. And I just feel like Portugal was amazing. The cruise was amazing. I miss
really
cruising.
Fun. It was really fun. We shared before. I was sure we were going to get bored, like, over a week. Mm-hmm. And no, not really. It was good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I said that it was going to be one moment, and that was really a whole trip that was, 3 weeks long. But hey, I didn't mention Spain or Iceland, so just the boat and just the boat and Portugal. The Portugal.
That was your last one, right?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Well, hopefully there was something inspirational here for you. I know we were just kind of telling our stories. Maybe that's boring. Maybe you turned this off by now, but
hopefully it didn't stress you out like another episode of a different podcast we were listening to stressed us out.
Oh, yeah. I don't think so. But yeah, stay tuned to find out what life-altering decisions I'll make next.
Stay tuned for the release date of Chris's travel-related self-help book.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. See you later.
That's all for today's episode of Go, See, Do, Explore. Thank you for joining us and sharing in the wonder of travel.
Keep the spirit of today's adventure alive by checking out our blog at goseedoexplore.com for even more travel inspiration.
Don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps fellow travelers find us and join our community.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep traveling by any means necessary.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashley, bidding you farewell and happy exploring.